I was 6 when the jasmine vine first learned my name. I don't mean it spoke, I'm not romanticizing a plant, but every time I ran my hand along the rough wall and brushed the small white stars, the vine loosened a little, shivering petals on my hair as if trying to keep me here. Home, even now when I shut my eyes. I can feel the dust chalking my fingers and hear my mother calling from the kitchen, "Maha, stop bringing flowers inside. You make a mess." I'd look down at my palms blooming white and think, isn't this a good kind of mess? I grew up in this house the way a river grows inside its banks, always aware of where the edges were. Our 2-story honey-colored home sat like an old storyteller at the corner of Gazia Street, with a carved wooden door that sighed whenever you opened it too fast. The corridor narrowed quickly past the entry, funneling you toward the living room, where a glass cabinet guarded porcelain birds and a set of company cups no one was allowed to touch without a guest. As if tea tasted different in them. The house smelled of cardamom and furniture polish, and when the monsoon came, it's the first strike of wet, unwarm earth that I wanted to scoop and bottle. Inside those banks, my family moved like weather. My father Nadim was the thunder-rare, but when it cracked, you paid attention. He was a man of few words and many expectations, punctuality, respect, and a performance of gratitude that often felt like theater to me. He believed a house could be an institution if you repeated enough rules inside it. My mother Sadaf was the relentless sun, warming, yes, but also scorching if you lingered too long in her scrutiny. She loved her home in a way that looked like polishing and rearranging and calculating what the neighbors might say. She would step back from a freshly fluffed cushion with her head tilted and murmur, "It has to look like we deserve our blessings." I had an older brother, Zain, whose voice reached every room a heartbeat before he did. He was handsome in ways that mattered to a crowd and generous in ways that mattered to a mirror. People loved him because he loved people. He loved people because they loved him back. Our younger sister, Hiba, learned early to float. She stayed out of shouting range and collected my mother's laughter like seashells, carrying it softly into other rooms. In this family, whether I learned to become a forecast, if the door closed a certain way, my father had had a bad day. If my mother's lipstick was brighter than her mood, we had company coming and we were all to behave. When Zain clapped me on the shoulder and said, "Look alive, little star," he was about to ask for something. Hiba tugged my sleeve when conversations curved toward trouble. I predicted. I made myself small enough to slip between fronts and survive unnoticed. And when I couldn't, I grew a second self quietly, privately, like a secret room in the house that only I knew how to enter. That secret room was my work. Numbers had a way of letting me control the weather. In school, I hid in the clatter of the computer lab, fingers learning the choreography of code while everyone else flirted with soft voices and harder hearts. At university, I found a part-time job auditing small businesses that couldn't afford a firm, but were willing to trust a serious-faced girl who carried a notebook and asked impossible questions. By graduation, I had a client list that could fit on a single sheet and a savings account that could not. I didn't tell my family much about the money. Not because they would take it, though something about our house suggested that any abundance must pass through committee, but because money would complicate the story they told about me. I was the creative, the one who didn't understand how the real world works, the helper, the peacekeeper, the person you called when the printer jammed or you wanted feedback on a paragraph or a favor in the form of, "Maha, can you just," as long as I was useful in small ways. I could protect the big work, the one that required whole days without anyone asking, "What are you doing that looks like doing?" If you had stood in our kitchen during those years, you would have heard 2 kinds of talk. The first kind was about other people's lives, their raises, their weddings, their child's acceptance into a respectable school, and how their good fortune made a shape we should copy. The second kind was about our house, what it needed, what it meant, what it said about us. My mother would lean her elbows on the cool granite and scroll through listings on her phone, sighing as if the screens were windows. "Look at this one in Gulistan," she'd say. 4 bedrooms, terrace, proper servant quarters. A real home, not this old thing. My father would look up from the newspaper without moving his neck. "Old things keep you safe," he'd reply. They stood the storm already. And they creak. My mother would snap lightly. They embarrass you. I would be at the sink, rinsing coriander, thinking how a creak is just a memory that got stuck between two pieces of wood. I couldn't say that out loud, so I'd say, "This tap leaks," which was also true, but safer. "Everything leaks in this house," my mother would reply. "Blessings leak when you don't hold them properly." That word blessings hung in our rooms like a framed diploma. It was both decoration and defense. When you didn't enjoy what you had, you were scolded for lacking gratitude. When you wanted more, you were reprimanded for greed. To my parents, gratitude looked like approval of their choices. When I moved salaries into savings instead of into a visible life, the car, the clothes, the new apartment, they decided I was irresponsible. A woman should put down roots, my father said one evening, not looking at me. Not run around in other people's soil. "I'm not running," I said. "I'm planting where the sun is." He folded the newspaper, a sound like a closing door. "Listen to her metaphors," he told my mother. "You see, floating." "Metaphors don't pay for electricity," my mother said. Our bill came higher again. I almost laughed because mine had come higher too, in the small studio I rented near my clients' offices. I kept that place as a workspace, not a life space. I wanted a boundary that wasn't a criticism. But my mother understood only two definitions of a room. A room you can show people and a room you hide. Zane lived mostly at home, anchoring himself with large gestures. He contributed to the household in ways you could photograph. Groceries stacked in the pantry, new curtains, an oil painting of a mountain in a gold frame that my mother worshipped by dusting. He'd hand my mother cash with the ceremony of a prince, then turn to me with a grin sloping into mischief. "What did you bring today, little star?" he'd ask. "Your favorite," I'd say, and produce the rare thing he wanted, quiet advice. I built spreadsheets for his freelance projects, negotiated fees when he got stuck, helped him through a tax tangle he thought he could charm his way past. "You're different," he'd say, sometimes grateful, sometimes like it was a diagnosis. "You think doors open from the inside?" "Maybe they do," I said once. "Or maybe locks behave better if you talk to them." He laughed and pulled me into a loud hug, smelled of expensive aftershave and applause. "Only you." Hebo was our family's softest answer. She hovered in the kitchen, learned recipes not because she would be forced to one day, but because she liked how a boiled rose syrup could dye the air. She watched me with observant eyes and then said nothing. Which in a house like ours was sometimes the bravest thing you could do. She kept a sketchbook where she drew doorways. Not people, not places, doorways. Because they are choices, she explained when I asked. Everyone is always standing in one, whether they know it or not. Sometimes I wonder if that's why I love this house so fiercely, because it taught me to notice doors. The front door with its sigh, the bedroom door that clicked in a certain lonely way. The kitchen door that released heat like a trapped breath. And then one winter, a new door opened one I had been building plank by plank without admitting it. I signed a set of papers at a small office with an ugly plant and a pleasant lawyer, and something inside me shifted. "You did it," the quiet self said. "You came home to yourself." I tucked those papers into a folder and then into another folder. And then into the back of a wardrobe I'd lined with lavender sachets, so no one would ask why that corner smelled like safety. I did not plan an announcement. I did not imagine my father's grudging nod, or my mother's reluctant smile, or Zane's theatrically proud whoop. I told myself things like, "We'll cross that bridge when it becomes a bridge and not a rope." And in the meantime, I kept showing up with coriander and tax advice and the patience you learn when you're always a little underestimated. But houses have ears, and families gossip even to themselves. The shift started so small I might have ignored it if I were not trained by this house to hear hinges. My mother began using a new tone when she talked about what was ours. She would say, "In our home, we do not leave shoes near the door." And then a beat later, "This isn't even really ours. We're only here until Zane is ready to make a proper move." Ready, as in married? Proper, as in announced to the world. "What does that mean?" I asked gently one afternoon, helping her stack plates. "It means," she said, slicing the air with the edge of a towel, "that people know we are in transition. No one wants to be stuck where they started forever. Until Zane settles, we are unsettled. You know how people talk? People always talk, I said. They talk more when you give them less to look at, she replied. Don't make that face, Maha. You know I'm right. I was not making a face. I was rearranging my features into something that would not betray the thought knocking in my head. Why does stability depend on Zane? But I swallowed it because I had learned the art of survival here. Ask only questions that won't burn everything you love. Later that week, my father called me into the living room with his familiar, a minute, which meant at least 15. He sat with his wrists on his knees, the posture of someone considering whether to get up, and never does. You're 28, he began, and I wondered how it has become a spell people use to make your life appear wrong. What is your plan? My plan, I said, is to keep working with the clients I have. Let's take on 2 more by summer, and he cut his palm through the air. Not that plan. Your plan. I knew the translation. The personal one. Yes. The paper beside him whispered as he shifted. A woman cannot live from one short-term job to another. She needs stability, security. I have those, I said, and he looked at me with such incredulity that I nearly laughed. I didn't. I mean, my work is stable. I stopped myself like a car braking at a known pothole. I'm good, I said instead. I'm safe. You're safe because of this house. He spoke like a judge delivering a fact. This roof keeps you safe. Your mother's cooking keeps you safe. Zane's presence keeps you safe from questions. We cover you from wind. You in return must. He paused, searching for a word delicate enough to pass as love and firm enough to hold. Comply. The unfairness of that word lit a slow, unpleasant heat in me. Comply as if I were a spreadsheet. As if love is a series of columns you fill with the right data and the right smile. I took a breath and reminded myself of my secret room and the papers lined with lavender. This is not the moment, I told myself. Pick your open door. I do comply, I said, softening my voice. I am here. I help. I don't make trouble. He eyed me, suspicious of grace. Don't become bold, he warned. Ambition makes women hard to live with. I wanted to tell him that ambition had made me softer because it taught me resilience. And resilience is a kind of yielding like bamboo, not like oak. But I nodded instead because sometimes nodding buys time, and I needed to buy a lot of it. Time passed in domestic measures, laundry cycles, weekly groceries. The rhythm of my mother's WhatsApp voice notes, the teaspoon count in the sugar jar. Our house took on that forward-leaning energy that says, a transition is coming, even if no one agrees on what the transition is. Zane had started dating someone named Ikra who, from the 2 times I met her, had the particular smile of women who have decided to be pleasing as a strategy until they can afford to be something else. My mother eyed her like a jeweler at a market stall, appraising, skeptical, unwilling to admit when she wanted something. My father found ways to retreat to the balcony during conversations that involved the word feelings. Meanwhile, my work grew like Iva quietly, determinedly, up walls no one else noticed. Evenings at my studio turned into long, clean hours of concentration punctuated by the click of keys and the soft hum of the electric kettle. I learned that satisfaction can be a private fire. I learned to trust the wrist flick of my own signature. I learned that sometimes the first door you open is a file cabinet, and sometimes it is the kind that changes everything. Still, when I came home, I folded myself back into the family weather. We were seated around the dining table one night when my mother announced, as if reading the weather forecast, "We'll host a dinner next month. Proper. Everyone. It's time." Time for what? Heba asked, her fork hovering. Time to remind people who we are, my mother said, smoothing her napkin like it had disobeyed her. And 2, to discuss future plans. She glanced at my father, who nodded with the solemnity of a man agreeing to fill a role. The house needs things, she added vaguely. The family needs direction. Zane tapped the table edge with a spoon, a drum roll for his own attention. If it's about me and Ikra, he said, relax. I have a plan. You always have a plan, my father muttered. Heba and I exchanged a quick look. She widened her eyes in a way that said, brace, and I lifted one shoulder in a way that said, Always. After dinner, in the dim corridor where the jasmine shadows crept in like ink, Heba tugged my sleeve. "Are you okay?" she asked, low. In our family, we reserved our sincerities for dark hallways. Daylight was for image. "I'm fine," I said. "You're lying," she said, not unkindly. "I'm practicing." I smiled without teeth. "It's a complex role I play." She studied me. "You don't have to stay in it forever." I thought of the papers. I thought of the fact that forever is just a line people draw when they're afraid of the next map. "I know," I said. "But if I leave it the wrong act, the audience will only remember the exit, not the whole story." "You and your theater," she said fondly. "You'll do what you always do. You'll make it make sense." I went to my room and closed the door and leaned my forehead against the cool wood and thought, maybe I won't this time. Maybe sense will have to make me. Then I took out the folder, more for the smell of lavender than the need to reread words I had nearly memorized. There is a difference between secrecy and privacy. Secrecy is a lie you tell to manipulate. Privacy is a truth you hold until it's strong enough to stand in a room that may not want it. I believed fervently that I was practicing privacy. As the dinner date approached, the house rehearsed. My mother replaced the curtains with those heavy ones that looked like they could keep out winter even in summer. She ordered a new rug in a pattern she called subtle luxury, which to me looked like a migraine trying to become a sunset. She painted the small wall by the stairwell a shade of green named heritage. She said the word gravely, like a prayer. "Don't you think it's performative?" I asked one afternoon, sidling up to her as she supervised the rug being rolled out. "Of course," she said, surprising me with her candor. "That's the point. The point of home. The point of being seen," she corrected. "Home is private. Family is public. Do not confuse the two." I wanted to say that in our house, the boundary between those was thinner than the curtain she'd just hung. Instead, I watched the rug settle under the table like a pond, deciding to be a floor. I pictured people arriving, stamping dust from their shoes, leaning over plates. The clatter of cutlery, a code we would all try to crack. I pictured because I could not help at a moment in which the house would inhale and wait. I hoped then, silently and perhaps foolishly, that the dinner could be a bridge, that we could come together and say the quiet parts with kitchen voices, that Zane could make his declarations without shiny performance, that my mother could ask for help without turning it into a test, that my father could admit he feared time moving faster than his control, that I could offer what I had without it becoming a betrayal to the story they kept telling. But if I am honest, and first-person storytelling does not allow the luxury of a masca. Also felt a curl of dread, because dinners in our house had a way of becoming trials. I was too used to being the one who translated, mediated balance sheets of the hard dead. I could see the roles already: judge, prosecutor, audience, defendant. And in the dim, private cinema of my mind, a scene flickered, my mother's hand slicing the air, my father's folded paper, Zane's charming shrug, Hiba's wide eyes, and Mimi at the center, the one they think can take it. In the days before the dinner, small humiliations began to gather like dust in corners. Harmless on their own, telling as a collection. My mother asked me to pick up groceries, then reminded me to keep the receipts. Then, eyeing me, added, "You don't have your own credit card, do you?" I blinked, surprised by the ignorance. Of course I did, but also by the little jab of distrust under the question. Like a needle hidden in a hem. "Yes," I said, "I do." "Good," she said too quickly. "It's just sometimes you forget practical things." Zane borrowed my car for a quick meeting and returned it low on fuel, winking when I raised an eyebrow. "You're a saint," he declared. "Your reward is in heaven." "I'd prefer it at the petrol station," I said lightly. He laughed and kissed my forehead, his go-to apology. And Heba, passing by, whispered, "You should invoice him for kisses." My father asked me to handle the electrician, which turned out to mean argue him down from a fair price until my father could feel he'd won. I paid the man his rate and told my father I'd convinced him. "Clever girl," he said, approving. And a part of me recoiled at how easy it is to manicure truth in a family that trims honesty into shape. If you'd asked me then why I didn't just tell them, show them, drop the folder into the center of the dining table like a card that wins the hand I would have told you that timing is a scaffold. The right structure holds your weight. The wrong one collapses on your head. I wanted the reveal to be a gift, not an explosion. I wanted to protect the house, even from the truth that might save it. The night before the dinner, I stood in the doorway of the living room while my mother counted spoons. She had polished them until they held abstract versions of elongated, warped. "Do you know," she said, holding up one to catch the light, "that when your grandmother first came here, she cried for a week. She said the house was too bare, too new, too lonely. Your grandfather brought her a single rug and said, 'Now we have a foundation.' She never forgave him for the joke." I smiled. Her jokes needed furniture. My jokes need audience. My mother replied. And for a moment we were two women sharing a glance of understanding, too tender for our usual script. Then she set the spoon down and said briskly, "Try not to wander during the speeches tomorrow. People must see you seated. They must not think you are restless." I am restless, I thought. I am rooted and restless, a contradiction I've made into a home. "Okay," I said. That night the house stretched and yawned and settled. In my room, I lay awake listening to the small sounds that only exist when a place is tired. Wood shifting, pipes humming, a gecko clicking somewhere like a tiny metronome. I thought of doorways. I thought of the jasmine vine that had learned my name and how sometimes being known is a comfort and sometimes it is a trap. I imagined the dinner like a stage set, plates gleaming, glasses aligned, a chandelier catching every intention and refracting it into something prettier than it felt. I imagined my father clearing his throat, my mother's smile tightened with effort, Zane's charismatic deflection, Hyba's careful pencil in her mind, sketching the outline of another doorway. I held my folder one more time and whispered to it like a superstitious actor whispers to a prop. "You will know when I told it. You will know when the truth can walk in without becoming a weapon." And then, finally, because morning always arrives, no matter how you plead with the night, I slept. If I could warn my past self, the girl wrapped around a secret like a blanket, I would say, beware of rehearsals that feel like the performance. Dinner will not be just dinner. You think you are protecting them by waiting. You think timing is grace. But sometimes waiting is just a different kind of storm. But that version of me did not have a messenger. She had only sleep and the promise of a day that would ask more of her than she had planned to give. When I woke, the house had already put on its face. The smell of frying onions and cumin announced the kitchen's army. My mother moved like choreography, directing ants and hired help with praise, as currency and criticism as religion. Zane's laugh pinged from the hallway. My father dressed before breakfast, a sign he was bracing for strangers. Heba slipped into my room and sat on the edge of my bed, hugging her knees. "Ready?" she asked. "No," I said. "But I'm practiced." She smiled, then searched my face. "What door are you choosing today?" "The one that keeps everyone standing," I said. It was not the truth, but it was the answer that would get us both downstairs without further questions. "Okay," she said, and left. I dressed in a deep green suit my mother had approved weeks ago, the color of heritage. I pinned my hair back and wore small gold earrings. In the mirror, I looked like a version of myself I had learned for exams and interviews. Competent, composed, forgettable when needed. I slipped the folder into my tote. Not because I intended to use it, I told myself, but because there are some truths you cannot leave behind, even when they are not invited. On my way down the stairs, I ran my fingers along the wall, brushing the jasmine vine that had threaded itself farther than it should reach. Little white stars dusted my skin. "A good kind of mess," I murmured, and the house sighed in reply. I stepped into the living room, and for a moment, everything stilled. The rug accepting steps, the chandelier rehearsing its sparkle. The chairs lined like witnesses, the table laid like an altar. My mother lifted her head, assessing. My father glanced at his watch. Zane looked at his reflection in the window. Heba traced an invisible doorway on her knee. I thought then, simply and with a certainty that felt like a key turning. Whatever happens tonight. I am not a weather report. I am weather. I can change the air. And the doorbell rang. The bell rang 3 times that evening, first with promise, second with tension, third with doom. The first was a cluster of my father's colleagues, men who smelled of cologne and cautious ambition. They filled the entryway with their handshakes and slow nods, remarking on the old charm of our house as if it were a relative weed hidden in a back room. My father stood taller with each greeting, pride disguised as neutrality. The second ring brought my mother's sisters. They carried trays of sweets wrapped in tinsel paper and their usual sharp commentary disguised as compliments. "So cozy here," Aunt Shazia said, kissing my mother on both cheeks. "It must be so easy to clean a place this size." My mother's lips smiled, but her eyes flicked to the curtains as if begging them to grow heavier and thicker. The third ringa, the third Duchard in Zane's circle. Friends with slick haircuts, women with laughter that arrived before their bodies. A few neighbors who had already heard whispers of a possible engagement. They spilled into the living room like water breaking a dam, their voices rising above the careful arrangement of chairs and tableware. I hovered near the edge of the dining room, the invisible line where service meets participation. My role was always help her carry the tray, fetch the napkins, refill glasses. "Maha," my mother hissed when she caught me standing still. "Don't just loiter. Make yourself useful." So I did. I smiled, I served, I bent, I blended. But the evening began to turn when the first toast rose, glass lifted high, laughter spilling into the chandelier. It was Zane, of course. He had a natural gift for timing. Unfortunately, it was often timing at someone else's expense. He tapped his spoon against his glass, a metallic heartbeat demanding silence. "To family," he declared, eyes gleaming. "To our home. And 2 new beginnings that will put us all on the map." Everyone cheered. My mother's smile stretched until it hurt to look at. My father nodded like the toast had been pre-approved. Then Zane's eyes darted to me, mischievous as a boy stealing mangoes. "And to my little sister Maha," he added. "May she one day figure out what she wants to do with her life." The room rippled with laughter, polite, then sharper as others joined. Some thought it was harmless, a brother teasing. But laughter has teeth when it echoes what people already believe. I felt each chuckle like a pebble against my skin. I forced a smile. "Careful," I said, voice slight but steady. "Dreamers grow teeth too." "Oh, don't be sensitive," Aunt Shazia chimed in, waving a hand. "He's just playing. Playing." That word they always used when someone was cruel but didn't want to take responsibility. Dinner began, dishes arriving in parade. Biryani fragrant with saffron, kebabs glistening with oil, chutneys sharp enough to sting. My mother orchestrated like a conductor, insisting guests take second helpings while simultaneously whispering to me to clear plates faster. But the food did not distract from the real feast: gossip, speculation, and the carving of futures as if they were roasts to be portioned out. "When will we hear wedding bells for Zane and Ikra?" One uncle boomed, and the table erupted. "When Zane decides the time is right," my father said, puffing slightly. "And you, Maha?" A neighbor leaned toward me, her perfume thick as syrup. Such a talented girlie must be planning something. A job, a marriage, something. Before I could open my mouth, my mother's laughter cut across mine. "She helps here and there," she said, dismissing me with a flick of her napkin. "But, creative types? They float. We don't pressure her. She'll find her place eventually." The sting was immediate. Helps here and there. As if my work was a hobby. As if the numbers and contracts I handled in silence meant nothing because they weren't displayed like Zane's purchases. I swallowed, my fork suddenly heavy. "I do work," I said softly, but no one heard me over the next burst of chatter. Midway through dinner, as I set down another platter, my father spoke louder than necessary. "Maha, sit. You look like a servant running around. People will think we don't treat you well." The irony sliced deeper than the rebuke. "Sit." when he was the one who insisted I fetch, carry, pour? But worse was the way the room turned eyes on me, some pitying, some amused. My cheeks burned. I sat too quickly. My chair scraped the rug with a shriek. More laughter. My brother leaned over, whispering just loud enough for those near us to hear. Relax, little star. No one expects you to shine tonight. As dessert arrived, gulab jalab, jamming like amber jewels, one of Zane's friends smirked and asked, "So, Maha, when your brother marries, what will become of you? Will you live with them or finally branch out?" The implication was sharp. I was the extra, the leftover, the one still under my parents' roof. Because she hadn't built her own. Before I could gather words, my mother chuckled. We keep telling her, find a good man, settle down. Otherwise, well, she can't stay here forever, can she? The room fell into a hush, broken only by a few nervous titters. I froze. Did she really just say that? She can't stay here forever. The walls that had once felt like ribs around my heart now felt like a cage. The house that had been my secret victory suddenly twisted into a stage where I was the clown, mocked, belittled, unwanted. Inside, my thoughts thundered. Leave this house. My house. But my tongue stayed still, nailed by humiliation. The guests eventually drifted away, full of food and half-remembered jokes at my expense. My mother collected compliments about her cooking like coins in a purse. My father smoked on the balcony, satisfied with the impression he'd given. Zane basked in laughter and promises of next steps with Ikra and me. I lingered by the jasmine vine, petals clinging to my wrist. My face burned with every remembered laugh, every dismissive glance, every careless word. I wanted to scream the truth, to throw the folder onto the table and watch their faces collapse, to say, this house is mine. These walls you mock me under, I own them. But I didn't, not yet. I closed my hand over the petals and whispered to myself, one day soon. Because humiliation, I realized that night, is not just pain. It is a seed. And when watered with silence, it grows into something strong enough to crack walls. The night of the dinner haunted me in fragments, the echo of laughter at my expense, the scrape of the chair when I sat too fast, my mother's voice saying she can't stay here forever. Those words echoed in my skull like a cracked bell. But humiliation has a strange aftertaste. Once the sting fades, it leaves behind a flavor of resolve. I returned to my small studio the next morning, opened my folder of documents, and stared at them as if they were a mirror. Ownership papers, receipts, legal transfers with my name written in ink darker than memory. This house they had humiliated me in. This home they had used as a stage to strip me of dignity it belonged to me. And suddenly I knew silence had served its purpose. The reveal needed timing. Yes. But it also needed witnesses. Fate, as if listening, delivered the stage. A week later, another family meeting was called. My father gathered us in the living room, his voice carrying that rigid authority that meant, this isn't a discussion. It's a decree. We need to talk about the house, he began. My chest tightened. He gestured toward my brother Zane, who sat with Ikra perched beside him, her eyes lowered in polite compliance. It is time for new blood to lead. Zane will be married soon. We should prepare to hand responsibilities over to him. My mother nodded immediately. Yes, a young couple needs a home. We'll manage the transition. Perhaps Maha can adjust. Find her own place. Find her own place. Again, the knife twisted. I can't believe this is happening, I whispered before I could stop myself. My father's eyes narrowed. What did you say? I met his gaze. You're planning to give the house away as if it's yours to give. Silence fell like a dropped curtain. My mother's face pinched. Zane chuckled, trying to diffuse tension. Don't be dramatic, little star. You know, this house is part of the family legacy. It stays with the family. Yes, I said. My voice steady now, but which family member? I rose from my chair, heart hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears. I walked upstairs, retrieved the folder from my wardrobe, and returned. My hands trembled not with fear, but with the weight of what was about to happen. I placed the folder on the table with a soft thud. Everyone's eyes followed. "What's this?" my father demanded. "The truth," I said. My mother gave a sharp laugh. "Maha, don't be melodramatic." But I opened the folder anyway, sliding out the first document, the one with my name printed in bold. The air thickened. "These are the ownership papers," I said, my voice low but cutting through the room. "This house is mine." At first, no one moved. Then, like a slow-motion wave, reactions broke. My father's face drained of color, his lips tightening as if words might betray him. "Impossible," he muttered. "How? When?" My mother snatched the paper, her eyes scanning furiously, her mouth working soundlessly before she finally hissed, "Forgery. This must be a mistake." Zane leaned back, wide-eyed but smiling incredulously, as if this were just another one of my creative experiments. "Come on, Maha, don't joke like this." "You can't expect us to believe it's real," I snapped, my voice sharper than I'd ever allowed it to be. "I bought this house years ago, quietly, legally, every signature, every stamp, every receipt, all here. You mocked me, treated me like a burden, told me I had no direction. And all the while, the roof over your heads was mine." Heba gasped softly, her eyes darting from me to the papers. She looked more stunned than anyone, but not with disbelief, more like she'd glimpsed a doorway she hadn't drawn yet. My mother's voice turned shrill. "How dare you hide this from us? You think you can play games with your family? We raised you, sheltered you, fed you on. This is how you repay us." "Fed me?" The words tore from me before I could stop them. "You fed me scorn, not support. You told me I was a wanderer, a dreamer, a useless helper. You humiliated me in front of everyone. And now you plan to push me out of my own house?" Zane slammed his hand on the table, his charm cracked and raw. "You think this gives you power? Owning paper doesn't make you the head of this family. I'm the eldest son. The respect, the responsibility's mine." I faced him squarely. "Respect is earned, not inherited. And responsibility. You've never carried anything heavier than your own ego." The room erupted. My father shouting about betrayal, my mother weeping into her dupatta, Zane trying to reclaim control with bluster. Through it all, I stood still, the storm circling me, the folder of truth a fortress in my hands. Finally, Hiba's voice cut through the chaos. Quiet but firm. "She's telling the truth," she said. I believe her. Everyone stopped. Hiba's eyes met mine, shining with something between awe and relief. "All these years, you've been preparing. You've been stronger than any of us gave you credit for. And they laughed at you." She turned to our parents. "You don't see her, but I do. She built something. She is something." Her words cracked something open in me. For years I'd carried the weight of being invisible, underestimated, dismissed. And now, standing in the center of the room, I felt a new truth settling into my bones. They had underestimated me not because I was weak, but because they needed me to be. And now the need was over. My father's voice finally broke the silence, hoarse and furious. "If what you say is true, then you betrayed us. You deceived us." "No," I said quietly, meeting his eyes. "I protected myself, because I knew this day would come." The room pulsed with disbelief, anger, fear. My mother clutched Zane's arm, whispering rapid prayers under her breath. My father looked as though the earth itself had betrayed him, and Zane's smirk had hardened into something darker. But me, I felt light. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel like a cage. It felt like a stagehand for once. I wasn't the clown. I was the playwright. The twist had arrived, and the play was far from over. The silence after my revelation was not empty, it was loaded. Every corner of the room hummed with disbelief, outrage, fear. The chandelier above us seemed to hold its breath. The jasmine vine outside scratched against the window like a witness trying to get in. For a moment, I stood there with the folder pressed against my chest like armor. My heartbeat pounding so loud I thought everyone could hear it. Then the storm broke. "You dare humiliate me like this. My father thundered, rising so suddenly that his chair toppled backward. His voice, usually measured, now cracked like a whip. In front of your siblings? In front of this girl he's brought home. He gestured toward Ikra, who shrank into herself, eyes wide. Humiliate you? I shot back, finally letting the years of swallowed words spill free. You humiliated, memed me, dismissed me, treated me like a guest in my own life. And when you planned to hand my house to Zane as if I were luggage to be packed and sent away, you call that respect? You should have told us. He bellowed, face reddening. You betrayed this family with your secrecy. No, I said, my voice cold now, steady. I preserved myself. Because I knew that if I told you, you'd find a way to twist it, to claim it, to erase me from my own story. And tonight proved me right. My mother clutched her dupatta to her chest like a shield. Tears filled her eyes, not of grief, but of fury cloaked as victimhood. We gave you everything, she wailed. We sacrificed so you could study, eat, live in comfort. And this is how you repay us. By turning us into beggars in front of our own children. I laughed bitterly. Comfort. Do you know what comfort you gave me? Mother, the comfort of being reminded daily that I was less than my brother. The comfort of hearing that my dreams were nonsense. The comfort of being your errand girl while you praised Zane for breathing. Her tears stopped instantly, her lips pressing into a thin line. Exposed. You've ruined this family, she hissed. No, I said, meeting her glare. I've revealed it. Zane slammed his fist on the table, rattling the spoons. His easy charm was gone, his face twisted in anger I'd never seen before. You think a few papers make you powerful? I am the eldest son. Respect flows to me whether you like it or not. People will laugh at you if you try to claim authority. You're just a girl who got lucky. I turned to him slowly, deliberately. Respect flows where it is earned. And you, brother, have earned nothing but applause for your performances. Do you want to know how many of your projects I bailed out? How many times I negotiated your payments, handled your debts, kept your name clean while you strutted about like a peacock? He blinked, stunned, before his anger reignited. Lies. I yanked another file from the folder, tossing spreadsheets, invoices, and contracts onto the table. Receipts don't lie. You can keep your applause, Zane, but the roof above your head, that's mine. And if you keep speaking to me like this, you may find yourself clapping from the street. Gasps rippled through the room. Then Heba spoke. Her voice was calm but cutting, the kind of quiet that demands attention. She's right, she said, her eyes fixed on our parents. You never saw her. You never wanted to see her. You were so busy polishing Zane's crown and planning his kingdom that you ignored the queen building the castle beneath your feet. Her words pierced the air like arrows. My father turned on her face, livid. Heba, don't you dare. But she didn't flinch. No, Baba, I've stayed silent too long. Maha deserves respect. She deserves acknowledgement. And if you can't give it, then at least stop pretending you know what's best for her. For the first time in years, I saw my father falter not in authority, but in certainty. I drew a long breath, then stood taller. My voice came out low, resonant, echoing against the walls. This house belongs to me. And from today, the rules change. You will no longer use it as a weapon against me. You will no longer threaten to cast me out. If anyone leaves, it will be by my decision. My father's mouth opened, then closed. My mother looked away, trembling with silent rage. Zane shook his head, disbelief curdling into hatred. I walked toward the main door, pulling the keys from my pocket. They jingled like victory. I raised them for everyone to see. These, I said, decide who stays and who goes. And they are mine. The room froze. The balance of power had shifted. No one could deny it now. You want justice. I added, my tone sharp as glass. Here it is. The next time you think of mocking me, belittling me, erasing me, remember who locks the doors at night. Remember whose name is written on every brick. This is my house, and I am done being small in it. The silence that followed was different than before. Heavier acceptance, threaded with disbelief. My father lowered himself back into his chair, suddenly older, suddenly smaller. My mother wiped her eyes but said nothing. Zane's jaw worked as if chewing words he couldn't spit out. And Heba? Heba smiled faintly, her eyes shining with pride. The house itself seemed to exhale, its creaking walls no longer a cage but a chorus. For the first time, I was not the errand girl, the punchline, the invisible daughter. I was the storm, and I had just rewritten the weather. The justice was not in revenge, was in truth. And truth, once spoken, cannot be unsaid. The night after the storm, the house was too quiet. No laughter from Zane echoing down the hallway. No clipped instructions from my mother in the kitchen. Not even the rustle of my father's newspaper. Only silence, thick, stubborn, refusing to move. I sat alone in the living room, the folder of papers still on the table like a crown no one dared to touch. The chandelier above me hummed faintly, and outside, the jasmine vines shivered in the night wind. For the first time, I didn't feel like the walls were leaning in to trap me. They stood tall around me, pillars of truth, mine to command. The next morning, I found my father on the balcony, staring into the distance as if the horizon had answers. He didn't look at me when he spoke. "You've shamed me," he said, voice rough. A father should never have to bow his head to his child. I stood in the doorway, calm but resolute. "You don't need to bow, Baba. You only needed to see me. To admit that I was more than the shadow of Zane, more than the girl who runs errands. But you never did." He finally turned his head, his eyes weary. "You planned this all along." "I planned to survive," I replied. "I planned to protect myself when no one else did. You always told me a woman needs security. Well, I gave it to myself." For the first time, he had no rebuttal. He simply looked away, his pride too fractured to hold him upright. Later, I found my mother in the kitchen. She was scrubbing the same pot over and over long after it was already clean. When I stepped in, she didn't glance up. "You've ruined everything," she whispered. "No, Ammy," I said softly. "I've only ruined the illusion. The one where Zane was the sun and I was dust in his orbit. The one where my worth was measured by what neighbors thought. That illusion is gone. What's left is truth." Her hands stilled. For a heartbeat, I thought she might turn to me, finally see me. But instead, she resumed scrubbing, harder than before. "Respect isn't bought with paper," she muttered. "No," I agreed. "It's earned with honesty. And that's something this house has lacked for a long time." I left her there, clinging to her pot the way she clung to appearances. By evening, Zane came storming into my room. His usual charm was stripped away, leaving only the rawness beneath. "You think you've won?" he spat. "You think people will respect you more than me? I'm the eldest son. You're nothing but a girl hiding behind legal tricks." I closed the book I'd been pretending to read and met his glare. "If being the eldest son meant respect, you wouldn't need to shout to demand it. Respect comes when people can trust you. Tell me, Zane, how many debts have I covered for you? How many lies have I cleaned up? And how many times have you taken credit for the work I did in silence?" His face darkened, but he didn't answer. He couldn't. I stood, closing the space between us. "If you want to stay here, you'll live under my roof with respect. If you can't, the door is right there. And remember, it locks from the inside." He stared at me, furious but helpless. Then, without a word, he stormed out. I heard the slam of the front door a moment later. For once, it wasn't me walking out of this house in shame. That night, Heba came quietly into my room. She sat on the edge of my bed, clutching her sketchbook. "You were incredible," she whispered. "I've never seen you like that." I smiled faintly. I didn't want to be like that. I just didn't want to disappear anymore. She opened her sketchbook and showed me a drawing a doorway, wider and brighter than any she'd drawn before. Inside it was not darkness, but light spilling out like dawn. "This is you," she said. "You opened a door, and now we can all walk through." Her words caught me off guard, filling me with a warmth I hadn't expected. "Maybe," I said softly. "Or maybe I just stopped guarding the wrong door." She leaned against me, and for the first time in years, felt the bond of sisterhood without weight or silence pressing down on it. In the days that followed, the house adjusted. My father moved more quietly. my mother avoided long conversations. Zane spent more time outside, licking his wounded pride. But the energy was different now. The air had shifted, and I walked through the rooms with my head high. The creaks in the floorboards no longer sounded like judgment. They sounded like recognition. The jasmine vine brushed my arm in greeting, as if to say, "Finally, you've come home to yourself." I realized something then. Revenge isn't always about throwing people out. Sometimes revenge is simply reclaiming the space where you were erased. Justice isn't shouting louder. It's making the truth impossible to ignore. For years, I had lived small so my family could live large. I had hidden my victories so they could pretend I had none. But the day I laid those papers on the table, I rewrote the story. I wasn't the spare daughter anymore. I wasn't the errand girl, the shadow, the clown at the table. I was the woman who owned the house. And more than that, Ty was the woman who finally owned herself. If you ask me now what lesson I carry, it is this. Never let the people who belittle you decide your worth. Never wait for permission to take up space in your own life. And never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. They're often the ones building empires in silence. My parents once told me, "Leave this house." What they didn't know, what they never thought possible, was that this house had already been mine. And now, finally, so was my freedom. And that was my story. They tried to push me out of the very house I built my life in, but in the end, the truth stood taller than their pride. If this story struck a chord with you, don't forget to like this video. It helps more people hear these kinds of voices that are often silenced. Make sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another tale of betrayal, justice, and ultimate revenge. And I want to hear from you. What would you have done in my place? Tell me your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, remember, no matter how small they make you feel, your truth can shake the walls of any house.